Down with the regime, down with the liar, down the deceiver, down with injustice. We launched revolution in 1962 against the imam, and now we're faced with a new imam who's been ruling us for 32 years.
This latest defection will only serve to boost the resolve of the pro-democracy movement.
God willing, we will continue our protest until the regime steps down.
Ahmad's defection came as another tribe, Bakil, also announced its support for the popular uprising. Bakil controls vast territory in the north and is widely considered the country's largest tribe. For decades, President Saleh has been building strong ties with the tribes to consolidate his grip on power. Now that Hashid and Bakil seem to be abandoning him, the president may find himself almost alone and isolated in the face of a movement gathering pace and determined to oust him. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
In Egypt, presidential terms may be limited to 8 years. That's one of the proposed changes to the constitution that will be put to a referendum ahead of elections later this year. And the ruling military council has apologized after security forces beat protesters during overnight demonstrations in Cairo. It said the violence was the result of unintentional confrontations between the military police and the youth of the revolution. A cabinet reshuffle by the King of Bahrain has done little to satisfy thousands of anti-government protesters. The demonstrators gathered at Pearl Roundabout in the capital, Manama. They then marched along a major highway blocking traffic. Police were deployed but did not intervene. The governor of the U.S. state of Wisconsin has threatened to lay off up to 12,000 public sector workers as early as next week. It's all part of an increasingly bitter dispute over state debt and union rights. Jane Dutton has more on that. So let's go back to our Washington, D.C. broadcast center. Jane?
It is certainly a bitter dispute there. The governor, Scott Walker, is trying to force his controversial bill through the Wisconsin Senate. The dispute has sparked debate and solidarity protests across the country. Roger Wilkinson has more.
For the 12th straight day, they marched outside Wisconsin's Capitol to protest a bill that would strip public employees of most of their collective bargaining rights. On this cold, wet day, Wisconsin government workers were joined by fellow union members from as far away as Los Angeles. Other protesters packed the Capitol's interior to demand that the state's Republican governor, Scott Walker, negotiate with public sector unions instead of trying to ram through the bill. But he refuses to budge. The state workers and their allies disagree with Walker's claim that his measure is necessary to deal with a projected $3 billion-plus budget deficit. They claim his real intention is to break the back of public sector unions. Walker won a partial victory late Friday when the Republican majority in the state assembly approved his proposal. But he needs the approval of the state Senate as well, and that body's 14 Democrats fled across the border to Illinois, thus denying the Senate the quorum it needs to vote on the package. Walker's move to rewrite local labor relations rules has turned into a nationwide battleground between pro-business Republicans and pro-union Democrats. At a solidarity rally in Washington, one of several across the U.S., demonstrators expressed their fear that if Walker's ploy is successful, it could eventually mean the end of collective bargaining nationwide.
The union is the last line of defense between workers and corporate greed.
But Governor Walker now says that unless legislators enact his plan to strip state employees of most of their collective bargaining rights, he will be forced to lay off thousands of workers beginning next week. Roger Wilkinson, AlJazeera.
Now, the man in charge of America's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan has offered up some frank policy advice. The U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates says it would be unwise for the United States to fight big land wars such as Iraq and Afghanistan ever again.
In my opinion, any future defense secretary who advises the president to again send a big American land army into Asia or into the Middle East or Africa should have his head examined, as General MacArthur so delicately put it.
At least 22 people were killed and 39 injured in a bus crash east of Peru's capital, Lima. The vehicle lost control and plunged more than 180 metres into a ravine on Friday. Peruvian authorities say the driver was likely trying to pass a truck on a two-way lane when he lost control. An American aviation company has unveiled a spy plane prototype that's breaking barriers in terms of size and agility. AlJazeera's Gerald Tan has details now of the micro drone that draws its inspiration from nature.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Or is it the military's newest reconnaissance gadget? Innocuous in appearance, insidious by design, this tiny spycraft could come right out of a James Bond movie. It has the appearance of a hummingbird, but more importantly, moves like one. Its wings allow it to fly in almost any direction, and its size, just under 16 centimeters, lets it maneuver into tight spots, going virtually unnoticed as the video camera in its belly records the sights and sounds around it. Engineering company AeroVironment developed the pocket-sized drone for the Pentagon's research arm to the tune of $4 million.
That's a success story. DARPA was interested in biomimicry as it applies to small flying aircraft for potential military surveillance reconnaissance applications. And they were interested in anything that somebody came up with, whether it be a dragonfly or a hummingbird.
In its early stages 2 years ago, the microplane stayed aloft for just 20 seconds. The current model, weighing less than a AA battery, has managed 11 minutes. There's still no timeline of when or if this artificial hummingbird will take flight in the battlefield, but don't be surprised if you see it flapping soon through a window near you. Gerald Tan, AlJazeera.
And that's it from me and the team here in Washington. Back to Doha.
Thanks, Jane. Enda Kenny, leader of Ireland's Fine Gael party, says he expects to form the country's next government following Friday's election. Rory Challens has more from Dublin.
All over Ireland, anger is being counted vote by vote. This election has galvanised a vengeful electorate. Indications are of over 70% turnout across the country.
At this count in the centre of Dublin, 6 different constituencies are being tallied up. And when all the boxes are emptied and the dust settles, Ireland will have had the biggest shake-up of its political landscape since it became an independent state.
The exit polls point to a hammering for the incumbent Fianna Fáil. Vote predicted. That's punishment for its role in Ireland's economic demise.
I just think that national movement, those ordinary people all around the country, had been let down, and we need to go back to those people. We need to listen to them. We need to. And it's not going to be an easy task. It will take us 5 to 10 years, but there has to be a space in Irish politics for a centre political movement, and there is no centre political movement if Fianna Fáil disappears.
Any country in Europe thinking of going cap in hand to the European Union or the IMF would do well to look at what's happening to Fianna Fáil here.
There will be chills going up and down the spines of various parties around Europe looking at the results and the consequences of taking.
The predicted winner of this election is Fine Gael, and their leader, Enda Kenny, has already declared victory. With their likely coalition partners, Labour, they'll have the unenviable task of trying to renegotiate the terms of the EU-IMF bailout. They'll also need to bring unemployment down and implement several years of austerity measures.
Obviously, our party is thrilled to be doing so well, but we're also very, very conscious of the difficulty the nation finds itself in at the moment, and conscious of the need for a strong and stable government to allow our country to move out of this.
The Irish people may be getting their revenge, but their pain certainly isn't over yet.
Rory Challens there reporting from Dublin. Officials in New Zealand say at least a third of all buildings in central Christchurch must be demolished and rebuilt after Tuesday's earthquake. Mayor Bob Parker says serious questions need to be asked about why some of them collapsed. 145 people died in the quake and more than 200 are still missing. Andrew Thomas reports.
What the earthquake didn't pull down, machines now razed to the ground. This was Brent Smith's bed and breakfast.
There's the saying, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I mean, I haven't stopped shaking since they started, and it's just history, you know, it's history gone.
The house was 155 years old. It was gone in an hour and a half.
This is just one of many hundreds of buildings that will have to be demolished over the next weeks and months. In the city centre, 1 in 3 buildings assessed so far has been found to be structurally unsound.
The precariousness of so many buildings makes the work of the rescue and body recovery teams that much harder, as aftershocks continue to bring masonry down. In the suburbs, different problems. One, silt. When the quake hit in a process called liquefaction, muddy water bubbled up through the ground. This is what it's left behind. Many suburbs still have no power nor water, so volunteers 30 kilometres from Christchurch have started a production line of hot food. A local helicopter company then flies in to pick it up.
As of yesterday, we flew in 12,000 kgs of hot food, hot meals into some of the poorest and hardest hit suburbs of Christchurch.
This is where the meals end up. When the residents of Burwood hear the rotor blades, they flock.
We had grilled cheese sandwiches on the barbecue the first night, so this is much better.
Because you can't store food with no refrigeration, it's, this is a good proper meal.
Streets can be cleaned, power will return, but buildings and people in Christchurch are gone forever. The city will never be what it was before. Andrew Thomas, AlJazeera, Christchurch.
We are going to take a break right now. Coming up after the break, a look at all the sport, including Pakistan's captain leads the team to a World Cup shot.
From local traders to international finance, it's commerce that makes the world go round. For global companies and developing markets, communication is the currency, and information is the most valuable commodity. Counting the cost at this time on AlJazeera.
A popular uprising that shook the country to its core. A defiant president under siege from his people. As the protesters took charge of the streets, we look back at the events that are